The medieval period often gets a bad rep when it comes to table etiquette. Though this was a time of chivalry and courtly manners, it is not uncommon to see the Middle Ages portrayed a little differently when it comes to fine dining. Movies might show people at a dinner to be loud, messy, and drunk, making rude jokes or tearing into a turkey leg violently with their teeth. But the truth of the matter is that banquets were actually a very refined affair, where one could expect just as many rules as with any other rich people party. Manners are simply subjective. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Historidame, and today, we're learning all about what it was like to attend a medieval banquet. During the Middle Ages, there were a few occasions on the annual calendar that might warrant the need for a grand feast, like Christmas, Easter, and May Day. But the most lavish banquets were usually reserved for weddings and coronations. As is the case for pretty much any party thrown by the rich throughout history, a banquet was not just an opportunity for celebration, but rather for the host to show off their vast amounts of wealth and social climb. Holding such an event was a power play in itself, and could help cement your position in the social hierarchy by showing everyone that you had fine taste in both food and entertainment, and had the means to afford the absolute best. Let's set the scene to help you understand what attending one of these events was like. Upon entering the great hall where the banquet would take place, guests would be met with an explosion of color and spectacle. The walls were painted with beautiful murals, and adorned with intricately woven banners and tapestries. The tables were decorated with flower arrangements and artistic centerpieces. And of course, entertainers were stationed in various points around the room, ready to dazzle partygoers with their music and performance. Wooden tables with long benches would be arranged in a U-shape around the banquet hall. A raised dais would make up the center of the shape, where the host would be seated, along with any honored guests that were in attendance. The order of seating would then move outwards from that point based on importance, with the wealthiest and most influential people sitting closest to the host, while all the less rich people would be relegated to the loser tables at the end of the horseshoe. These tables would be decorated with white tablecloths, and were actually made to be easily collapsible, so that they could be removed or set up when needed, with the exception of the most important table, which was fancier than the others and was often permanent. Banquet attendees would be escorted to their assigned seats by servants, before silver platters of food were carried out and the meal would begin. Service was always conducted in order of rank, starting with the lord's table and moving downwards. Food was served to people in sets of 2, who would then share the portion amongst each other. As the meal progressed, musicians, jesters, and performers would provide entertainment for those eating. This might also include a rehearsed show or pageant, often depicting historical scenes that were accompanied by elaborate set pieces. Other activities, such as dancing, might have also been held before or after the meal. But of course, the atmosphere alone did not make a party. Though theatrics were appreciated and expected, they sometimes paled in comparison to the meal itself. A banquet might have had 5 or 6 courses, sometimes even going up to around 12 if it was being hosted by a particularly wealthy lord or royalty. The range of dishes available could have been quite extensive, and usually included expensive delicacies that the average citizen didn't have access to. Meat, for example, was available in excess, since alongside owning livestock, hunting was a popular pastime amongst the nobility, which was illegal for commoners to take part in. Hunting parties could bring back all kinds of game for the table, like deer, wild boar, or rabbit. But the aristocracy also enjoyed dining upon pretty much every type of bird as well. At a banquet, choices like roasted goose, pheasant, or duck might have been just as likely to show up as something more out of the ordinary, like swans, eagles, songbirds, or even a peacock. This variety of meat would have been served primarily as a roast, but also could have been used in pies, stews, or puddings. Fish was also eaten, along with soup, vegetables, pastries, porridge, tarts, and jellies. Flavors that were common in high-end medieval cuisine used an abundance of expensive spices to show off wealth, and often employed a sweet and sour taste. Food was seasoned with things like wine and vinegar, as well as mint, cinnamon, nutmeg, honey, saffron, ginger, and black pepper. Nuts like almonds were also used as a filler and to add additional flavor. All of this was accompanied by wine, which was sometimes diluted with water to prevent excess drunkenness. But of course, eating all these fancy things that the poor could only dream of wasn't enough to make a successful banquet. Remember, rich people parties were about spectacle, meaning that all of these dishes would also have to be displayed in unique ways. Bright colors were particularly fashionable amongst the aristocracy, so certain foods might be painted with natural dyes made from flowers, herbs, or spices. Another way to stand out was through shape. Food would be worked into elaborate sculptures, depicting ships, castles, mythological scenes, or sometimes they were just made to look like another food entirely. Roasted meats were often presented whole, and were dressed up with parts of the animal that they came from, having horns, beaks, and claws sewn back on after they were cooked. A roast boar might come out to the table with the head and tusks on display, decorated with strings of nuts and dried fruit to resemble entrails. Birds would have their feathers reattached, or fanned out to make an elaborate centerpiece. Every measure was taken to make sure that a banquet was as grand as possible. But as with any celebration amongst the upper classes, in order to enjoy all of this, you first had to know the rules. Though perhaps medieval manners might not be considered quite as refined compared to other points in history, proper etiquette was still very important for formal events. The 4 tenets of manners were cleanliness, courtesy, sharing, and restraint. And even if you weren't a member of the nobility yourself, proper behavior was expected from everyone the moment they entered the building. Hygiene was one of the most important aspects of proper etiquette. Guests attending a banquet were expected to be clean and presentable, and to keep themselves in that state throughout the entirety of the event, especially their hands. Bowls of warm water, made fragrant with herbs and flower petals, were passed around at the beginning and end of the meal for hand washing, and it was imperative that everyone used them. You see, tableware was a bit different back then. While during a regular meal, plates might be made of wood or iron, banquets had to serve a large number of guests, so people would instead eat with something known as a trencher. This was a flat, stale piece of bread that was used in place of a plate in order to soak up any liquid produced from the meal. As for cutlery, however, forks weren't around yet, so the primary tool for a meal was the knife. Knives were used for cutting and dividing, or to collect small amounts of sauce to be added to a piece of food. It was considered poor etiquette to do anything else with a knife, such as cleaning the nails or teeth. It was also a BYOB situation where they were concerned. Or in other words, you had to bring your own knife to the party, unless you were the host or an honored guest. Spoons were also available, and could be used for things like soups or stews, though they would be provided by the host. Any other food was eaten with one's hands. Guests were expected to be courteous and share with everyone around them. Those of lower rank should serve their higher-ranked neighbors any dish first before using it for themselves, and men were generally encouraged to serve the women nearby. When it came to drinking, not everyone would have a cup of their own, and the communal drinking cup would be passed around from person to person as needed, rotating as it went so that no one drank from the same spot. It was also not unheard of for people to drink directly from a jug or pitcher, though the dish would have to be wiped down afterwards as a courtesy to other guests. Restraint was also expected, and no one could begin eating until the entire course was served and the host had first begun. Breaking these rules would be seen as a sign of gluttony, as would taking exceedingly large portions or sampling one item multiple times. When eating, it was important that one followed the general rules of good manners. Spitting, belching, or speaking with one's mouth full was highly frowned upon, as was putting your fingers into any drinking cup. When eating soup, your spoon should never be filled too much so as to risk spilling, and the task should always be done quietly without slurping or blowing. It was also sometimes frowned upon to dip bread into soup, since it might leave pieces behind. And guys, this one would have killed me. I love dipping bread into a good soup. The meal would end once it was obvious that everyone was finished eating, or the host decided that he was done. The food, dishes, and trenchers would then be cleared away by the servants, once again starting with the host and moving down in order of rank. Finally, hands would be washed once more before the banquet ended, or the guests moved on to other entertainments depending on the occasion. And there you have it. That's what it would have been like to attend a real-life medieval banquet. Lots of rules, but probably a fun party. Sadly, a trip to medieval times just isn't the same. Hey everyone, thank you for watching! If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or a comment down below. If you want to see more content like this, you can also subscribe to my channel, and keep up to date on all the fun history videos of the future. But for now, I bid you farewell.